The president is back from an eventful trip to Asia. Highlights included positive trade talks with China and, of course, the historic steps across the DMZ in the Koreas. President Trump later reflected on the moment's importance during a speech at an airbase in South Korea.
He asked me, would you like to do that? And I said it would be my honor, and we did, and we went over the line and turned around, and everybody was so happy. And many people, I noticed, from Korea were literally in tears, crying, because it's a big thing. It's a big thing.
That move was an attempt, of course, to jumpstart negotiations with North Korea after they stalled during a summit in Hanoi, Vietnam back in February. Since the freezing of negotiations, North Korea has reportedly increased production of materials related to nuclear weapons and also conducted several missile launch tests. Former Deputy Assistant to President Trump and NSC Chief of Staff Fleitz praised the DMZ trip, calling it, quote, an important achievement by President Trump. Here to elaborate on why and discuss other news that emerged from the G20 summit is Fleitz. He is currently President and CEO of the Center for Security Policy. Great to see you, sir.
Good to be here.
All right. What gives you confidence that this will turn out to be more than just a photo op?
I think it was a great opportunity for the president to move ahead his successful policy with North Korea, which has substantially lower tensions. And let's think of it this way. Let's think of 2 trips to the DMZ by 2 separate presidents. President Trump was meted warmly by Leader Kim, and they had a productive 50-minute meeting. They agreed to resume talks. When Barack Obama visited the DMZ, he had to look at it from afar through bulletproof glass and through binoculars. We have a long way to go to get an agreement, but tensions are significantly reduced. There have been no missile launches except for a handful that were fired in anger after the Vietnam summit. No nuclear tests. The chance of an accidental war is substantially lower. We got talks started again. I hope they're going to lead to something, but frankly, the president has already achieved a lot.
I couldn't agree more, Fred. I am always happy that these leaders are talking. We truly were on the brink of war back in 2017. So I think the real question is about the eventual type of deal. I've been talking about this over the last couple of hours about I believe that the nuclear freeze is probably the right way to go. I would love your views on that because North Korea is probably not going to give up its nuclear weapons.
Well, let's start with the premise that the word denuclearization wasn't even being used before this president.
Right.
Now, I know there's a New York Times story today saying that the administration is considering denuclearization. That story, I understand, is false. John Bolton has said it is false. It has not been discussed with senior officials. This is a rogue element in the administration trying to push administration policy. President Trump walked away from a partial deal with North Korea at Vietnam, which is why the summit failed. That's because I think lower level people were generating ideas that the president was more flexible to make a deal than he really is. He says no nukes. He wants denuclearization. I think that's a red line.
So just to be clear, so the story in the New York Times saying that the administration is considering, rather than complete denuclearization, a nuclear freeze is false. I mean, who do you suspect within the administration would have an interest in putting this out there?
John Bolton tweeted today that the story is false and reprehensible and that there should be consequences for the person who leaked that to try to box in the president. There hasn't been an interagency process for such an idea, and it goes against what the president has promised. And I regret this happens from time to time. Lower level State Department officials try to create momentum for an idea that they want to do. But look, President Trump sets the policy, not these low-level people who anonymously leak to the newspapers.
Isn't it a more realistic goal, though, frankly?
It's easier, sure.
Yeah.
We could easily get an agreement like that. But that's not what the president asked for. He wants a good deal, not just a deal that he could walk around and say, hey, I got a deal. That's what Barack Obama did and John Kerry did with the nuclear deal with Iran. They just wanted a deal. They didn't care how bad the deal was. And I think that we've seen how bad that deal is over the last few years.
Yeah, and to your credit, what you're saying, Trump has walked away from the table with Kim Jong-un, something a lot of people did not expect he actually would do. But on the merits of denuclearization itself, you worked in the administration. I mean, is there actual willingness on the part of the North Koreans to denuclearize? They starved their people for decades in order to get these nukes. It is the complete security guarantee of their people. Why would they give them up?
I think we have to convince the North Koreans that they do not need nuclear weapons. And I would argue that their nuclear arsenal has moved from a deterrent force to an offensive force.
Yes.
If North Korea is building ICBMs that could hit the east coast of the United States, this is not a defensive force. This is a force to drive the United States out of Asia, out of the Asia-Pacific region. That's why I think this personal diplomacy between President Trump and Kim is useful. He's trying to build a personal relationship. He's trying to build confidence between the two countries so they could be sure that North Korea really doesn't need nuclear weapons. I think that message can be made. I think we could bring in other countries, bring in China, bring in Russia for security guarantees. Let North Korea know that there's a better future ahead for them if they give up these weapons.
Let's talk a little bit about China. There was an announcement on that front as well. The president acceding to one of their major demands to drop the restriction on U.S. companies selling to Huawei. In exchange, the president says that the Chinese are going to buy more of our agricultural products, although there were no particular details on that side. What do you think, though, of the U.S. giving in, at least partially here, on Huawei?
I don't think it's true that the U.S. has decided to give in Huawei. I think we've decided to negotiate on Huawei. The president has previously showed willingness to negotiate Huawei. Let's be clear. Huawei is part of the Chinese intelligence establishment. Yes. They want to set up a global spy network to not just steal military and trade secrets, but personal information on citizens all over the world. The president knows this, but he's expressed some willingness to talk about Huawei.
I mean, Gordon Chang called this a surrender.
Well, I'll tell you that the president knows what a threat Huawei is. And I don't think he's simply going to let Huawei off the hook. But he's agreed to talk about it with the Chinese. I think that would be a more correct way of describing what was agreed to.
So just to be clear, so he didn't agree specifically to allow U.S. retailers to sell to Huawei, or do you consider that part of sort of opening negotiations?
He agreed to talk about Huawei in the talks, but to say he's dropping our restrictions against Huawei, that's not correct.
Yeah, it hasn't happened yet. I also want to talk about Iran. News coming out of Iran that Iran today, their foreign minister revealed, exceeded the nuclear fuel limit of 2015, an official kind of breakout from the deal, a big blow to the Europeans and the agreement itself. Where do we go from here on Iran?
Well, I think that the president has a very successful policy on Iran. His pressure on Iran, the maximum pressure campaign, is denying Iran funds that it would use to fund terrorist groups, its troops in Syria. Hezbollah in Lebanon is starving because Iran cannot give it the funds that had been provided. Under the nuclear deal, Iran is allowed to enrich uranium up to 300 kilograms. They need about 1,000 kilograms to theoretically make enough weapons fuel for one weapon. That is, if this low-enriched uranium was enriched to high HEU, highly enriched uranium. The fact that they may be going to 600 kilograms is a problem, but it's an expected problem because Iran was allowed to enrich uranium while the agreement was in place. It was only a matter of time when Iran stopped getting the benefits of this deal that it was going to do this. This is simply an effort by Iran, another effort, to blackmail the international community to stick with this terrible deal and to give it sanctions relief, and it isn't going to work.
Well, that's what happened up to the deal, right? They were dialing up the uranium, and they were getting pretty close. I mean, they were only the breakout time for them was in a matter of weeks. Right now, where are we at in terms of breakout time?
I think they could probably make a weapon within a few months. That was true last year. It's true right now. It always was true. The fact is, by allowing Iran to enrich uranium during this agreement, we've allowed Iran to improve its capability to make nuclear weapons fuel. It was the worst concession of this agreement. A new agreement has to insist on no uranium enrichment.
So you were chief of staff to John Bolton, who's gotten a lot of attention, is very controversial. Could you just give us a window into his thinking in particular on Iran?
Well, I mean, John Bolton has always taken a tough view on Iran. He believes that it is the leading state sponsor of terror. It's trying to destabilize the region. He's concerned about its WMD programs. I worked for him at the State Department also. He called out Iran for likely covert BW and CW programs, and he thinks we should make a very tough position against Iran. But it's also worth stating that no matter what John Bolton said when he was a private citizen before he was in government, his positions now reflect what the president wants. He's an honest broker in the NSC. He collects the positions of all the different agencies, presents these options to the president. He always laughs when people points to an op-ed he may have written several years ago. Right now, his policies are the president's policies.
What do you make, though, of the analysis that he and Pompeo have basically sort of boxed President Trump into a corner on Iran, where, you know, we're in this tit-for-tat sort of escalation?
The president sets the foreign policy based on the advice of his advisors. I know that all the recommendations to the president concerning an attack on Iran, was it now 2 weeks, I think? There was no dissent. Everyone agreed on that. The Pentagon agreed, Pompeo and Bolton agreed. The president decided to go in another direction. I agreed with that, I might add. I don't think it was justifiable to kill 100 to 200 Iranians in retaliation for the downing of an unarmed drone.
Is it your understanding that was the only option presented?
I don't know what options were presented,
Yeah.
but that was presented, as you know, 10 minutes after the planes were launched.
Right.
The president decided that they should be called off. The president is torn between his promise not to get the U.S. into wars and to get us out of wars, and the reality that he may have to take military action against Iran. I think he's struggling with this. He's trying to do the right thing. And look, when a president is hesitant to commit military force to take human life, that's something we want to hear. That's a good.
Couldn't agree more.
Indeed.
Thank you, Fred. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Great to have you.
Good to be here.
Next up on Rising, we're going to get the former head of the Republican National Committee's take on the first round of Democratic debates.
He shares who he thinks made the best case for his or her presidency and the most viable competitor for President Trump when Rising continues.